Hello and welcome to part 3 of our Blotter tutorial. In the last video we set up Blotter and configured it to work on one piece of text on our site, as you can see in front of us. In the completed project we can see that the same effect is being applied almost as a shadow on a second piece of text. I've just used some simple CSS here to create the layered effect. In this video, we're going to look at how to make our code more flexible and useful by changing it to apply the same blotter effects to multiple elements. Let's take a look back at our JavaScript to get started. At the moment, our animated text is hard-coded, which is fine if we're only applying the effect to one element because the text will remain the same. To apply our blotter effect to multiple areas of different text, we need to create an array containing the elements we want to animate, and then use JavaScript's for each method to iterate through these elements, pull out their text, and apply their blotter effects. Again, we're going to take this step by step. To start, let's go back to our HTML and add a blotter class to our div. We're looking for the div with a class of background. You can see that down here. So all I'm going to do is add the blotter class in. Next up, let's use JavaScript to select all of our blotter elements. So head back over to script.js, and I'm just going to save our elements into a constant right at the top of our file. And I'm going to call the constant blotter elements list. We're going to be using the JavaScript method query selector all, and we're going to be using this on the entire document. So I'm going to use document.query and then selector all. And inside of these brackets I'm going to put some quotation marks and then .blotter, because we're looking for elements with the blotter class. Let's log this out to see what we get. So I'm going to use console.log and just log out our blotter elements list. Now I'm going to go to publish to update our site with our changes, and then click on our site. As you can see, to start off with, the blotter effect is now being applied to the second piece of text, but we're going to fix that in a second. What we're interested in at the moment is to see whether our elements list is printing out both elements that we've added the blotter class to. So I can see here that we've got a node list, and inside of our node list we've got both of our divs with a class of blotter. So that's worked great. However, I mentioned that we're going to be using a for each method, and if we take a look at the documentation for this method, we can see that the for each method takes an array. So what do? Well, we need to somehow change this node list that we can see here into an array. If you can, pause the video here and try to find out how to do this yourself. Okay, don't worry if you couldn't work it out, and well done if you did. What I would recommend doing if you find a problem like this is simply searching online for the solution. I'm going to go ahead and type in node list to array and hit enter. And I've got this as a top hit, converting a node list to an array with vanilla JavaScript. Sounds pretty promising. This article essentially talks about the ES6 release, which brought a handful of different methods into JavaScript, and one of them is the for each method. And this talks exactly about using query selector all. So if I scroll down a little bit, it shows us the previous way that this was done, and it then shows us a nice new way to do this. So we're going to add this line to our code. We're going to use array.from and then the name of our elements list to convert our node list into an array. So back to our script file. I'm going to comment out this now And then on the line below, I'm going to create another constant, and I'm going to call it Blotter elements array, and make this equal to capital A for array, and then dot from, and inside of the brackets I'm going to put our blotter elements list. Now again, I always like using console.log just to make sure that we are getting the intended result. So this time I'm going to print out our elements array and see if we get one. So I'm going to republish our changes, head back over to our site and hit refresh. And this time I can see that we've actually got an array here. I know it's an array because it's got square brackets around both of our elements. So, awesome! We're now ready to use this array with the for each method. Let's take a closer look at for each. This is a vanilla JavaScript method that executes provided code once for each array element. So all that means is that we can use this to basically repeat the same set of code for different text. It looks a bit like this. We're going to basically use the name of our array, and then a dot, and for each, then some brackets. Then we're going to provide just a word that describes each item in our list, and we've got a list of elements, so element will work for us too. We then have this kind of equal sign and then the greater than sign, and then we can actually add the code that we want to iterate over. So let's take this step by step. Back in our JavaScript, I'm going to add this just below where we were working. So I'm going to comment out the console.log again, hit enter a couple of times, and let's add blotter elements array, and then dot for each. We've then got a set of normal rounded brackets. I'm then going to write the word element, because this describes each element that we're going to be passing this code to. We've then got the equal sign and the greater than symbol. And I'm then going to put a set of curly brackets. And inside of these curly brackets is where we're going to put the code that we want to repeat for each element. So what do we want to repeat? Well, let's start off with just taking all of the code that we wrote previously. So I'm going to literally copy everything or cut everything, and then I'm going to paste it inside this for each method. Now there are going to be a few things we need to change. So let's take it step by step and line by line and look at what we need to edit or remove or add. So on this first line here, we set the text that we want Blotter to render, and we've still got our hard-coded Chinese symbols inside of here. This is the first thing we need to change. So we want to basically take the element that's passed to this for each method and grab the text from the HTML. And to do this, it's fairly straightforward. We can use that keyword that we provided up here, which is element, and we can use .inner HTML. And what this does is basically grabs the HTML from each element. Perfect. Okay, so that's it for the changes that we need to make to the text setup inside of here. Let's carry on going down and see if there are any other changes that we need to make. So in this area, we set up our material and its default values. That all looks good to me. On this line, we add our material to a new instance of Blotter, and then we add our setup text in there too. Again, all fine. Finally, we draw our canvas and say which text we want to apply to it. And then we get to this line where we set and create a constant called element. Now, we've already used the element keyword up here, so if we actually run this code, this line would throw an error. So we can delete this now because on the line below, when we have scope.append to element, that is actually applying to the correct element, i.e. the one that's being passed from our array. Awesome, so now we can publish our site and check out our changes. So let's click, there we go, publish changes. And let's click on it to see what we get. And perfect. It looks like our code has worked. We can see both Chinese symbols appearing. However, there are a few things we can do to make the code more streamlined. We've also got the original text actually still being displayed and visible on screen. So we need to add in a line of code that will delete the original text. Let's head back now and finish this off by just doing a little bit of reorganisation and adding in that final line. I'm going to go just below where we set up our text, and to get rid of the original text inside of our elements, what we can do is write that element keyword followed by a dot and the word inner and then HTML and make it equal to an empty string. So what this should do is remove any text from our HTML and only show the rendered blotter text. Again, let's just double check that works. I'm going to go over here and hit refresh. And we can see that once the site has loaded, we get rid of those pieces of text. Okay, so our project is kind of getting there now. The last thing that I want to do is just to restructure what's inside of our for each code, for each loop. Now, when we're coding, it's really quite important to try and keep our code to a minimum, and also to try and keep the how many times the same code is repeated to a minimum. So inside of our for each loop, we should really only have elements of our blotter code that need to change when our text changes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move these 4 or 5 lines. I'm going to cut them and I'm going to paste them just outside of this for each array. Let's put them actually at the top of our file. So what that does is that reduces the amount of code that has to be repeated for each element. Now, we're only repeating this code twice, so we won't actually see much different in load time, but imagine if we were applying this code to multiple pieces of text. We wouldn't want the browser to have to run all of those calculations and create lots of different materials over and over again. So removing that and creating global instances of our material and our blotter means that our browser hopefully can run a little bit more things more smoothly. Okay, so let's just double check that it all works fine. And it does. And that is about it for this video. In our final video, what we're going to do is make our text react to the mouse movement. And that will be our project completed.